Hello and welcome. Today I am going to talk about how to add value to your professional practice. Sometimes one may think, why do patients choose some professionals over others, even though there are so many other valuable alternatives on the market? So that will be today's focus, discussing the criteria with which patients can eventually choose one professional and not another. Sometimes when your assistant asks you for an update, "Doctor, what do we have new to talk to patients about?" Sometimes we may feel at a disadvantage with some of the proposals from the other colleagues. Sometimes when they point out things that we simply cannot do for them or of services that we cannot provide them. Sometimes when the patient comes and says, "Come on, doctor, why are you charging me if I can get it for free in the other site?" Sometimes when we have the perception that we are turning on patients, it is possible that the value of the proposition that we were using before is no longer working. And so the idea is, how do we help patients distinguish us from the other professionals on the market? How do we do that? The idea is to try and build a wall that takes us away from the proposals of the other professionals, and so it makes it so that we are not so vulnerable. And that wall has to be built with a strategy value in mind. But first, let's define value. Value is the subjective property to be able to satisfy the needs or to generate satisfaction in the user. It is the quality that makes a product, a service, or a person estimable. When we talk about value, it is basically the ability we have to exceed or satisfy the patient's expectations, and it is a balance of a number of elements. Because when we talk about value, value has more components than a nightstand. So there are things that we have to do with quality and things that we have to do with the price. There are elements that we have to do with the corporate image, and so the idea is to weave that framework to satisfy the patient. Because end users have that equation spinning in their heads, and that is, what do I get from benefits? What sacrifices must I make to be able to access those benefits? And that in the end will be the result that determines that a patient chooses me and not another professional. The formula of value is then composed of several elements: tangible elements, products, services, additional things that we generate, and the image. All this will then generate as positive actions or even positive feelings that the patient or client may receive. But on the other hand, there is also the sacrifice that the patient has to make, these being the psychological costs, spending time and effort, and even the price that the patient will pay. So the mix of all these positive things and the sacrifices that I must make in the end is what will ultimately generate value. And the value at the end is what the client thinks that the product or service should cost him. But always when we talk about value, it is important to understand that value is composed more of intangible things compared to characteristics or tangible things. And obviously value does not have to do anything with the price. Furthermore, in marketing there is a principle that says, if it can be touched, it cannot be worth too much. If we want to build a valuable strategy to entice patients, we have to try to give them something that does not have to do with the tangible elements in most cases. I'm now going to give you an example that relates to the Olympics, even though we still do not know if there will be the Olympics, as we are recording this a few weeks before they start. But let's talk a little about the meaning of courage and using the example of the Olympians. A gold medal, an Olympic gold medal to be exact, is made up of 1.32% gold, 6% copper, and 92% silver. In reality, a gold medal costs about $650. Yes, $650. $335 for a silver and $5 for a bronze. And then comes the question: if a gold medal costs $650, why are the states capable of investing up to $40 million to obtain just a singular gold medal? For the meaning of the product. Sometimes the cost has nothing to do with the value of the product. So we have to build a network of things and experiences so that the patient really perceives the value that we can present to him, and that we really are a shining star in the middle of the environment for him. So value is the interpretation of the utility. It is the interpretation of desire, the interpretation of interest, of beauty, and of importance. That sum of all these things is what will help the patient choose us over other professionals that are possibly just as good as us, just as attentive to the patients, or just as committed to them. But then in the end, the service will be, the value, it will be a feeling, which is composed above all of the intangible elements. Now, I apologize to mention brands, but when we talk about value, it is not enough that things are done well for one to be able to aspire to one element or another. It is not enough for a clock that measures the time well that people are willing to pay a certain sum for it or make a sacrifice. So, value in the end, when we talk about value, it's how could we define it emphatically? Value is when I go into the doctor's office and I receive a consultation and a pair of glasses. He provides me with a series of services and charges me roughly $500. And I leave the office. After the consultation, take a deep breath after paying the $500 and I say, it deserved that payment. It was worth the sacrifice. That in the end is the value of the service. And it is, you make a series of sacrifices to access a professional and a product, or a service that the professional provides. And after that, after the patient makes all those sacrifices, he will say, it was worth it. But what needs to happen so that people understand that it was worth it? You have to build a scale of value. You have to understand what I am willing to give my patient, my time. So within the scale of value, there are minimum attributes. Let's say a well-done exam, relative punctuality with the patient. Let's say these are basic values. Well, we simply have to, because if not, people will not see us. We will be transparent to everyone. But that alone is not enough to guarantee success, because we will have to go a bit beyond the basics. There are even expected values, which are attributes that one says to oneself, I go anywhere and anyone will be able to provide it to me. When we really start to properly position ourselves on the consumer's hard drive, we already have to start to talk about attributes that the patient does not necessarily expect and that they do not necessarily know, or especially attributes that are exceptional. When you give the patient something that is exceptional, that the patient did not know that you could have delivered, that is something that will help you accommodate that patient in the professional ventricle. So the challenge is knowing how to build value propositions that are desired or that are unforeseen for the patients, which is the best way to positively impact the patient's mind or hard drive. But then if I want to build a value strategy, there are two elements that have to go perfectly hand in hand. The first element is that it is a perceived utility, and it is, I am going to receive a contact lens fitting and all those other things, and then they are going to give me a voucher to go to a coffee shop that is in Beirut. The bonus may be good, but it really doesn't work for me. So, when I am going to generate a valuable proposition, it has to be something that is really useful for the patient. It is not enough that it is good for you, it has to be useful for the patient. But the second thing is that it must contain a degree of uniqueness. That is, in order to differentiate myself, it has to be useful for the patient, but it has to be a proposal that other professionals that are not using. Because otherwise, I am going to be a part of the landscape. And to extend that my proposal is unique and useful for the patient, that is where we will manage to build the feeling of value.
Como dice, Michael Porter, perdón.
As Michael Porter says, you have to create something that is perceived by the consumer as unique. So, when we say, how do I create a differentiation? How do I make it look unique? The challenge is that all the products, all the services, all the proposals that you make to the patient are being capable of being differentiated. In other words, you can sit down, make a proposal and work with your team with the certainty that any proposal, no matter how simple it may seem, you are able to differentiate it from the other proposals on the market. So, in being able to do that, we are going to be able to impact the consumer or a patient. But then the question is, how do we manage to communicate that to the patient? There are three communication or interaction schemes with consumers, and as we go up the slope, we are going to be able to more and more effectively communicate this to them. When we have a patient or when we have a consumer, the easiest way to communicate with him is through the transactional way. And what do you talk about in the transactional way? A scheme that is based on, quote-unquote, the cheapest cataract has to do with the price reduction strategy. And that transactional communication with the consumer is based on the simplicity in the transaction. And they ask, how much is it worth? And then they pay with the credit card and leave without...
Tienes una cita presencial con tu preparación académica, con los profesionales de la salud visual de América Latina, con los negocios.
Asegura tu cupo en franjafedopto2021.com inscripciones.
Enfrentando eficazmente la era digital.
In order to make this transactional communication, from our point of view, we assume that the patient knows everything. We assume that the patient knows the product and the service. And then we will have to start managing commodities, products that are not differentiable. Implementing this transactional communication scheme over time with the patients, it has a certain market that we can impact. They are patients who emphasize price, who also emphasize the insensitivity to value propositions, who are patients who believe they know everything and are totally unfaithful people. They will come to you, ask you for the formula, and they always want to buy it online. And then they see where someone leaves it for them a little easier. These types of patients may generate some kind of peace of mind in your operation in these days. But it is impossible for you to build a future with such patients as these. With patients who do not perceive the value and who are only there thinking about the price, those patients are the ones who can help you pay for services today, but in the end, they are not going to be a relief for your professional practice. Then comes the relationship with that patient that allows us to communicate in a consultative type, and that we can work with them on that. Then we can help identify the patient's problems. We can advise and generate solutions. These types of patients come because they require a solution to a problem, and they appreciate this special treatment. They look for value in the relationship, and they appreciate the value, and they are even willing to accept a higher price. If these patients of extrinsic value give us peace of mind in the short-term and the long-term operations, and even in medium-term, and somehow they give us peace of mind in the face of future growth. But really, the holy grail of relationships with patients, even though I don't know if this applies in this case, has to do with the relational part. When I manage to develop an interaction with my patient where I can work on personalization with them and even on building a win-win relationship between developing long-term value, it is there where I really have a patient who will accompany me my whole life. that I treated him with orthokeratology and that at some point he will also put multifocal lenses. But let us remember that patients, the statistics say, will require some type of visual correction and around 40 times in their entire lives, and the best bet is to supply the 40 visual solutions.
Yo apunto a que soy capaz de suplir las 40 soluciones visuales.
These types of patients expect great input from you, as they trust you, and that is what truly allows us to build something of value along with the patient. But then, for me to be able to build a proper strategy with them, we already know that we have to develop something relational with them. However, the construction of a strategy must first take into account the knowledge and understanding of our habitat, with whom we inhabitate the activity with, how the general economy is currently developing, and how we assume what the future of activity will be. We have to do a personal scan because we must first understand the value of our patients. There are patients who value some things, for example, the treatment, the warmth, that your assistant remembers you by your name, and that they congratulate you on your birthday. But there are patients for whom this may be irrelevant to, and what they value is, for example, new technological proposals. It is necessary to understand first that the patient values the most what he gives more importance to. We already understand that my patient values certain elements, or proposals, or characteristics. Now, the second thing is that I must compare myself with my colleagues, as I do with my colleagues. I also have to worry that if my patient values that, I have to generate a little distance with my colleagues, because if I can't, I can end up having a huge problem. We must be clear. What is the difference of my product in relation to that of my colleagues? Does this difference in any way represent an advantage? And if the patients know that difference? Many of you now know that we have a private practice in Medellin, Colombia, where I will be waiting for you. Within the classic optometry service that we offer, we place great emphasis on the early detection or prevention of glaucoma. And so we talk about how the professionals will detect and treat the glaucoma in the patients. However, we would be wrong to do tonometry or to look at the angles of the exterior anterior chamber or look at the excavation. If I do not alert the patient and do not tell him, look, here is the difference and here is what we are going to do to prevent this silent enemy that is glaucoma, the vision thief. And it is in that way that the patients will value this difference as long as they know it. Some companies ask customers what they want, but market leaders already know what the customers want, even before they are aware of it themselves. So the issue is, how do we move to read the aspirations of the patient early? And that is where our action plan will come from. An action plan in value, the first thing to do is to try and make the life of the patient easier. So there is an equation that is called the coefficient of convenience. And that is, what is my desire for me to acquire something, and what is the sacrifice or the annoying factor? And so if I want to make life easier for the patient, I have to think about the location, I have to think about how much time the patient will demand, the ease of access, the schedules, the forms of payment, and in short, this whole series of elements that will make life easier for them. First proposal, make life easier. The second proposal is to provide a great result. When we talk about providing a great result, it is trying to challenge the assumptions in time. There is a term in psychology called learned hopelessness, and learned hopelessness speaks of you having a little bird in a cage at home. And you have the little bird there in the cage for months or for years. And anytime you put food in the cage, you get distracted and forget to close the cage, and you end up going to work while the cage is still open. And it's quite possible that when you return at night, the bird is still inside of the cage because he unfortunately learned that he cannot escape that environment. And so the challenge when we talk about providing a superior result is challenging the assumption over time, challenging the learned hopelessness, and trying to generate new alternatives. Another element that we must take into account when building an action plan is how to take the patient's problems as our own. In other words, putting yourself in the patient's shoes in terms of providing solutions that are within. I use the word relevance a lot in patient care, and that is timely, appropriate, and convenient. Offer guarantees, discounts, price ranges, but above all products that suit him, that he needs, and that he can fulfill his aspirations. Another element is trying to enhance the knowledge of the patient. And unfortunately, the market sometimes miseducates the patient, and then they only learn either the simplest schemes or even the simplest purchase based on the prices or even the simplicity of the product. And so we must enhance the knowledge of the patient and train him and teach him about more complex products so that when we make a proposal to the patient is really willing to make the effort, and we have to address the complexity, and we must understand what the patient's weaknesses are. And above all, we must understand well what his needs are to try and positively impact him there. There is an element that speaks of involving patients in creating the value. Value propositions should try to involve you in creating value. For example, he is going to give you the simplest example of all, and then we will go on to the optometry. For example, IKEA. There you go to buy a piece of furniture from IKEA, and then the supplier shares with you. He assumes that you are going to assemble the furniture so he can make a sacrifice on the price. Sometimes these concepts of retrofitting, of lens replacement, all of these things in which the patient will not require effort or creativity from you, it may allow you to share a little of the value or of the solution with the patient, trying to allow access more easily, or either one should not charge the same or expect the same sacrifice from the patient when you are fitting a scleral lens for the first time as when ordering a replacement, for example. And finally, it is trying to provide the greatest amount of options for the patient. The visual proposals, when they are simple proposals, make users go out and do the optical tour, and they may enter many opticians or many other offices to ask how things are. To the extent that I am able to provide more options, more creativity, more different options, it is more likely that the patient will come and knock on the door. A father once took his son out for a walk, and on that walk the son met the echo. Then the boy yelled, "Hello!" and the echo answered him. He screamed, "Horrible!" and the echo repeated it. "Terrible!" and the echo answered him. Then the frightened child turned to the father and said, "What is this?" Then the father took him by the hand and said, "Listen, son, beautiful." And the echo answered, "Wonderful." And the echo repeated. The boy asked, "But Dad, what is this?" And the father told him, "It is life, and the flames it responds to you. Ask him for the best, and he will give you the best. Ask him for the worst, and he will give you the worst." The proposal is to ask for the best in life. Let's ask for the best in life so that our patients have the solutions in their hands, so that we can have a more positive impact on their quality of life, and as we do that, life will also reward us. Because life, the Creator, nature, God, Allah, Muhammad, they don't take anything, and everything will be returned in benefits for us and our patients. Thank you so much, guys.